The ceiling fan spun in slow, mechanical circles. Each blade caught the harsh, blue glare of the street lamp outside the bedroom window. The hum of the broken central air conditioning unit rattled inside the drywall, a low, rhythmic grating that had gone unfixed for a month. Sarah Miller lay rigid against the pillows, her breath shallow. A thick medical brace was cinched tight around her lower back, holding her spine in a desperate frozen alignment. On her left hand, a dark purple bruise from the hospital 4-line throbbed in time with her pulse. Her husband, Mark, stood in the doorway. He crossed his arms, his eyes fixed onto the glowing screen of his phone, and delivered the sentence like a flat weather report. This Saturday, all 12 members of my family are staying at our house for 2 weeks. Have everything ready. Sarah felt a sharp spike of pain shoot down her lumbar region as she tried to shift. The clinical scent of hospital antiseptics still clung to her skin, fighting against the heavy, humid air of the Georgia summer night. It had been exactly 5 days since Dr. Whitfield closed the deep incision along her spine. 5 days since he handed her the post-surgical sheet with strict restrictions printed in bold, black ink. No lifting over 10 pounds. No standing for more than 15 minutes at a stretch. Minimal stairs. For weeks of absolute rest. Mark, Sarah said. She kept her voice level, filtering out the tremor of physical pain. I just had major surgery. Please, can we postpone the visit? Even just a few days would help me recover. Mark did not look up from his phone. His fingers tapped rapidly on the screen. No one is waiting, he replied, his tone devoid of heat, yet entirely absolute. Just do as I say. The words did not hit her chest where emotional pain usually flares. They sank lower, into her stomach, turning cold and heavy. In 22 years of marriage, Mark had used many tones, but never this one. It was the detached, corporate chill of a manager denying a routine leave request during peak business season. He did not wait for her response. Satisfied with his own decree, he turned on his heel and walked down the hallway, the sharp snap of his loafers fading into the dark. Sarah stared at the closed door. The rhythmic rattle of the faulty air conditioner filled the silence, sounding less like a household defect and more like a countdown. She reached out to the nightstand, her fingers brushing the plastic bottle of oxycodone. She chose not to take it. She needed her mind entirely clear. For more than 2 decades, she had operated as the invisible foundation of this house, absorbing every shock, executing every demand, and erasing her own presence to maintain the comfort of others. But tonight, as the structural ache in her bone reminded her of the surgeon's blade, the machinery of her compliance finally broke. To understand how a dedicated dental assistant became a ghost in her own home, we must look back at the 15 summers that paved the way to this very bedroom door. The house grew perfectly still after Mark left. Sarah waited until his deep, rhythmic snores cut through the steady rattle of the broken air conditioner. Every movement was a battle against her own body. She slid her legs over the edge of the mattress, the canvas medical brace creaking softly in the dark. A sharp, burning ache flared in her lower back, but she did not reach for the oxycodone. She needed absolute clarity. She grabbed her laptop and a small metal flashlight from the nightstand. She crept toward the hallway bathroom, her bare feet pressing against the cold hardwood floors. Once inside, she turned the deadbolt. The sharp click echoed in the small space. She sat on the closed porcelain lid of the toilet, pulled her knees up awkwardly to relieve the pressure on her spine, and began her quiet rebellion. She opened the fireproof document box her father had gifted her decades ago. The metallic scent of old key locks and aged paper drifted into the small bathroom. She pulled out a thick manila folder. Under the beam of her flashlight, the legal document felt heavy. Her eyes scanned the crisp, black text until they landed on the words, sole owner. Her name, Sarah Miller stood alone beneath her father's elegant signature and the raised corporate seal of the notary. There was no mention of Mark. When her parents passed away years ago, the deed came directly to her. Mark had been too distracted by his phone during the signing to notice. For 15 years, he had casually shifted his language from your house to our house, using a simple grammatical theft to open her childhood home to 12 people without her consent. A cold, analytical focus washed over Sarah. She set the deed aside and opened a blank Excel spreadsheet on her laptop. The screen flooded the dark bathroom with a harsh white light. Her fingers began to tap the keys, moving with the precise rhythm she used when logging patient charts at the dental clinic. She was done playing the emotional martyr. She was going to audit her life. She dug out old bank statements and began logging the hidden costs of the past 15 summers. She created a column for food. She typed in the expensive gluten-free items for Helen, the premium steaks for the men, and the endless boxes of brand-name snacks for the teenagers. She created another column for utilities. July after July, the electric and water bills spiked into bright red numbers as 12 extra people ran the showers and blasted the AC. She added the 3 air mattresses she had replaced out of pocket after the kids punctured them. She added the specialized orthopedic mattress she bought just so her father-in-law wouldn't complain about his back. Finally, she created a column titled Unpaid Labor. She calculated a modest rate of $10 an hour for 14 days of 14-hour shifts, cooking, scrubbing high chairs, washing mountains of sour towels, and driving airport shuttles. Her fingers hit the final command. The software ran the calculation instantly. The number popped up at the bottom of the screen in bold text: $64,800. Sarah sat in the dark bathroom, staring at the digital digits. She did not cry. The deep, heavy sadness that had weighed on her for years suddenly evaporated, replaced by the cool, sharp precision of a surgeon looking at a clear X-ray. She saw the exact dimensions of her problem. Her sacrifice had never been viewed as a gift. It had been treated as a free utility. She closed the laptop with a quiet, decisive snap. Her mindset had completely shifted. She was no longer a victim waiting for her husband's permission to heal. She was the sole owner of the house, the keeper of the data, and she was about to change the rules of the system. The morning sun baked the asphalt of the dental clinic parking lot. Sarah sat in her car, the steering wheel warm under her palms. She reclined the seat just enough to ease the sharp, pinching pressure in her lower spine. Outside, the bright glare of the Georgia heat rippled across the concrete. Inside, the air smelled faintly of her lavender car freshener and mint toothpaste. She dialed a number she had not called in years. Claire Jenkins, a sharp, efficient voice answered on the second ring. Sarah took a slow breath, feeling the canvas of her medical brace press against her ribs. She laid out the facts. She spoke with the calm, methodical precision she used when reading dental X-rays to anxious patients. She told Claire about the spinal surgery. She detailed the 5-day-old incision. She described Mark's flat refusal to postpone the arrival of his 12 relatives. Claire listened. The line was quiet except for the faint, rhythmic tap of a pen against a desk on the other end. When Sarah finished, Claire's voice lost its corporate edge. "Sarah, let me be entirely clear," Claire said. "You are the sole owner of that property. Legally, you hold full authority over who occupies that house and under what exact conditions. Your husband cannot overrule a safety decision about your own estate. You are not asking for his permission. You are informing him of a fact." A quiet wave of relief washed over Sarah. She looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. The tired lines around her eyes seemed less like a defeat and more like a map of survival. "I don't want to cause needless harm," Sarah murmured. Setting boundaries to protect your physical health is not cruelty, Sarah, Claire replied firmly. It is the absolute bare minimum of survival. Now, let us build a defensible paper trail. Everything must be in writing. No verbal agreements. For the next 20 minutes, Sarah's fingers flew across her phone screen, executing the steps of her action plan. First, she called Buckeye Restoration. The receptionist, a brisk woman named Patricia, pulled up Sarah's old file. Sarah had paid a heavy cash deposit months ago to fix a rotting water stain on the upstairs hallway ceiling and sand down the warped floorboards. Mark had demanded she delay the work to save money. Now, Sarah unlocked the contract. She scheduled the 3-person crew to arrive at exactly 8 a.m. on Saturday morning. Second, she added a specific clause to the work order. The contractors would use a heavy, oil-based chemical primer and polyurethane sealer for the hardwood floors. The safety documentation was explicit. No residents could remain inside the premises during the active 48-hour application due to toxic fumes. It was a strict liability protocol. Third, Sarah uploaded her official surgical discharge papers to her medical insurance portal. Because her home was undergoing mandatory hazardous maintenance during her critical recovery window, the insurance framework immediately approved her for a short-term stay at a specialized rehabilitation apartment complex 15 minutes away. The facility featured single-level flooring, grab bars in the bathroom, and a nurse on call. By Friday afternoon, the trap was set. Mark spent the evening at his brother Todd's house, finalizing the logistics for the big family arrival. The house was empty. Sarah moved through the rooms like a ghost leaving a machine. Her brace creaked softly as she packed a single rolling suitcase. She packed loose cotton clothing, her prescription bottles, her laptop, and a framed photograph of her parents. She walked into the kitchen. The air smelled of wood polish and lemon cleaner. She placed a small, neon green sticky note on the granite kitchen counter. She wrote 3 lines in clear, block lettering. Gone to insurance-approved recovery housing per doctor's orders. House closed for scheduled structural renovation starting Saturday morning. Contractors have the keys. Do not enter the property due to chemical liability issues. Sarah rolled her suitcase out to her car, the wheels clicking sharply on the driveway. She drove away as the evening sky turned a deep, bruised purple. That night, lying in the sterile, quiet bedroom of the rehab apartment, she listened to the hum of a perfectly functioning air conditioner. For the first time in 15 years, she closed her eyes and slept in total peace. The blinding Saturday morning sun beat down on the asphalt of the suburban driveway, creating a shimmering wave of heat that radiated upward. At exactly 10 o'clock, the heavy quiet of the neighborhood was shattered. 3 oversized, glossy SUVs pulled up in a perfect, synchronized row, their heavy tires crunching loudly and aggressively against the loose gravel. The engines idled for a moment, a low, mechanical rumble that signaled the arrival of the annual storm, before clicking off. Doors slammed in rapid succession, the sharp, metallic thuds echoing across the lawn. The humid Georgia air, already thick and suffocating, was instantly filled with the chaotic clamor of 12 distinct voices. It was an auditory assault that Sarah had navigated in silence for 15 summers. Helen Miller stepped out of the front passenger seat of the lead vehicle. She did not look at the house. Instead, she immediately began waving a woven straw fan against her face, her features twisted into a look of practiced disapproval. She adjusted her sunglasses and loudly complained about the sticky southern humidity, declaring to no one in particular that the air felt like a wet blanket. Behind her, the chaos amplified. Her son Todd was already at the back of the second SUV, pulling open the trunk with a loud snap. He began dragging out massive neon-colored pool floats, heavy plastic beach chairs, and oversized coolers that sloshed with ice, and the expensive seafood his wife insisted on bringing every year. The teenagers spilled out onto the grass, slamming doors, laughing, shouting over one another, and immediately arguing about who would claim the largest guest room upstairs with the better view of the yard. Mark Miller walked toward the front porch. He carried himself with a confident, proprietary stride, the heels of his heavy leather loafers clicking sharply against the concrete steps. This was his moment of patriarchal pride. He was the successful son bringing his entire clan under his roof, showing off the sprawling suburban home. He reached into his pocket, his fingers wrapping around his heavy keyring. He stepped up to the front door, ready to throw it open and welcome his army. Then, he stopped dead in his tracks. His hand hovered inches from the brass lock. Draped completely across the middle of the front door was a thick sheet of clear, industrial plastic, held down at the edges by bright, neon yellow contractor tape that fluttered slightly in the hot breeze. Taped directly at eye level, right where the keyhole should be, was a bold, laminated sign. The crisp, black block letters flared under the harsh morning sun, delivering an unmistakable message. Warning. Hazardous chemical application in progress. Do not enter premises. Exclusion zone per insurance liability contract. Mark blinked, his jaw dropping slightly. He stepped back, his loafers scraping against the concrete. Through the large glass window next to the door, the familiar interior of his home looked like a deserted ghost factory. Heavy, translucent plastic sheeting hung from the ceilings in long, ghostly drapes, completely sealing off the hallway and covering the living room furniture like white shrouds. From deep within the house, the low, mechanical whine of an industrial floor sander echoed, a sharp, grating noise that vibrated through the glass panels. Suddenly, a massive wave of a chemical odor seeped out through the gaps in the screen door. It was the pungent, suffocating, and chemically sweet sting of oil-based primer and industrial polyurethane wood sealer. The sharp, invisible vapor hit Helen's throat the moment she stepped onto the bottom porch step. She erupted into a violent fit of coughing, dropping her straw fan onto the concrete as she clutched her chest. What in the world is that smell? Helen gasped, her voice shrill as she pulled the collar of her blouse up over her nose and mouth. Mark, what is going on here? Why is the house wrapped in plastic? Open the door immediately. Mark's face turned a bright, volatile red. The veins in his neck stood out as the eyes of his entire family turned toward him, waiting for an explanation. The supreme confidence that usually served as his second skin evaporated in a second. He grabbed the brass doorknob through a gap in the plastic and twisted it violently. The mechanism clicked, but the deadbolt did not budge. He began to bang his fist heavily against the solid wood, the thuds swallowed by the drone of the sander inside. Sarah, open this door, he yelled, his voice cracking with an embarrassment he could not hide. The heavy lock inside finally turned with a slow, metallic scrape. The door opened just a crack, held back by a heavy safety chain. A tall man, wearing thick canvas coveralls, heavy rubber boots, and a massive dual-cartridge respirator mask stepped into the narrow gap. His eyes, visible behind protective plastic goggles, looked down at Mark with complete indifference. He held a metal clipboard in his gloved hand. "Can't come in, sir," the foreman said, his voice heavily muffled and distorted through the rubber valves of the mask. "We just laid down the hazardous chemical base coat on the hardwood. The vapors are highly toxic, especially in this humidity. Nobody enters this property for the next 48 hours. It is a strict company safety protocol, and more importantly, it's a major insurance liability for the homeowner. I live here. I am the husband." Mark roared, stepping closer, his chest puffed out as he tried to use the corporate authority he wielded at his logistics job. My family just drove 6 hours from Texas. We have elderly people and children out here. Get your men and your things out of my house right now." The foreman did not flinch. He slowly flipped a page on his clipboard, entirely unimpressed by the display. "The active contract is signed and fully authorized by the sole property owner listed on the deed, Sarah Miller," the foreman replied coldly, his muffled voice flat and unyielding. "The work order explicitly states a zero occupancy mandate during the active curing phase. If you break this seal or step inside, we legally stop the job, you forfeit the deposit, and you will be issued a $5,000 safety violation fine from the state. Take it up with the owner, sir." Behind Mark, the driveway erupted into absolute, unmitigated chaos. The sister's toddler, overwhelmed by the sudden halt and the sweltering heat, began to scream at the top of its lungs. Todd's teenage son slammed an SUV door and complained loudly that he couldn't connect to the home Wi-Fi from the lawn. Helen was hyperventilating, leaning heavily against Todd's shoulder, demanding a shaded chair and a glass of ice water immediately, claiming her asthma was flaring up from the fumes. Mark turned away from the door, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold his keyring. The utter humiliation of standing on his own porch, locked out in front of his parents and brother, was suffocating. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumb smashing into the screen as he speed-dialed Sarah. 15 miles away, the atmosphere was entirely different. Sarah Miller sat quietly by the wide, triple-paned window of her rehabilitation apartment. The room was a sanctuary of absolute stillness. The air smelled of clean, sun-dried linens and a faint hint of fresh pine cleaner. The walls were painted a soft, calming cream color. She had just completed her morning routine of physical therapy stretches, moving slowly, feeling the deep, tight ache in her lower spine slowly loosen. She placed a chilled, soft gel ice pack against her lower back, leaning back into the specialized orthopedic chair approved by her insurance. Her phone on the small wooden side table began to vibrate violently, its harsh buzzing sound cutting through the quiet room. She looked at the screen. Mark. Sarah let it ring. She watched the screen flash, counting the seconds. She let the first call go to voicemail. Then the second. On the third consecutive call, she calmly reached out, picked up the device, and slid her thumb across the glass to answer. Mark's voice did not just come through the speaker. It exploded into the room, raw, breathless, and dripping with absolute fury. "Sarah, what the hell did you do?" Mark roared, his voice echoing off the quiet walls of her apartment. "My parents are standing out on the driveway in 90-degree heat. The house is wrapped in plastic and locked tight. There are though SUA now ripping up the floors. Have you completely lost your mind?" Sarah did not blink. Her heart rate did not spike. She kept her face perfectly relaxed, her eyes focused on the green leaves of the oak tree outside her window. She kept her voice perfectly flat, using the exact, even, and reassuring tone she used to calm terrified, trembling patients before a major dental extraction at the clinic. "I am doing exactly what my surgeon, Dr. Whitfield, ordered me to do, Mark," Sarah said quietly, her voice a stark contrast to his screaming. "I am recovering from major spinal surgery. I stood in our bedroom 5 days ago, with an 4 bruise still fresh on my hand, and I told you explicitly that my body could not host 12 people right now. I asked you, I begged you to postpone this trip for even a few days so I could heal. You looked at your phone, turned your back on me, and told me that no one was waiting. You told me to just do as you said. Sarah, this is completely insane. You are playing games." Mark stuttered, the sheer shock of her calm voice throwing him off balance. His usual corporate smoothness was completely gone, replaced by a desperate panic. "Where are we supposed to go? Where the hell are you?" The structural renovation contract with Buckeye Restoration was finalized and shot 3 months ago, Mark, Sarah explained, her tone methodical, like an auditor reading a line item. You were fully aware of the floor damage and the hallway water stain, but you chose to ignore it, assuming I would just call the company, break the contract, and cancel the work to serve your family's annual vacation. I chose not to cancel it, since you insisted to my face that this trip could not be delayed under any circumstances. I naturally assumed you had already used your logistics skills to make alternative lodging arrangements for your relatives. I am currently staying in an insurance-approved medical recovery facility that handles my physical therapy. Do not come here. Do not look for me. Sarah, listen to me. You hang up this phone, and... Sarah did not let him finish the threat. She firmly pressed the red end call icon. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she pressed the side power button down until the screen faded into a deep, glossy black. She set the phone face down on the wooden table. The room instantly returned to its beautiful, undisturbed silence. She took a slow sip of her warm tea, feeling the heat radiate through her hands. Back on the suburban porch, Mark stood frozen as the line went dead in his ear. He stared at the blank screen of his phone, his mouth open, a sudden, cold dread washing over him. The weight of his reality crashed down like a physical blow. He turned around to face his family. Helen was now sitting on an upturned cooler in the shade of the garage, weeping softly into a tissue. Todd was pacing the grass, his face dark with anger, while his wife was furiously scrolling through her phone, muttering that every local bed and breakfast within 30 miles was completely booked for the annual summer festival weekend. Mark had no choice. The pride he had carried into the driveway was entirely shattered. He stood in front of his family, humiliated, and pulled out his wallet. He bypassed the joint checking account debit card, the one Sarah managed, and pulled out his personal black credit card. It was the private account he had spent 3 long years stealthily padding with bonuses and logistics consulting fees, money he had meticulously saved to buy the new sports utility vehicle he had been eyeing. With a shaking thumb, he opened a hotel booking application and called the Marriott property located near the interstate, 20 minutes away, because it was a last-minute, peak-season reservation during a major regional festival. The hotel ran a premium rate. Mark had to book 3 separate multi-room suites to accommodate 12 people. When the final screen popped up, the digital receipt flashed a brutal, uncompromising total onto his eyes for $1,000 for the 2-week block. His chest felt incredibly tight, a sharp pain blooming behind his ribs as he forced his thumb to hit confirm. The financial cost of his pride was immediate and devastating. Over the next 14 days, the cosmic scales of the Miller household balanced themselves with an agonizing, relentless precision. Mark, who had spent 22 years coming home to a pristine house where dinner magically appeared on the table and laundry vanished into thin air, was suddenly thrust into the burning, chaotic center of the family machinery. He was no longer the successful supervisor. He was the invisible servant. Without Sarah to act as the silent shock absorber, the true nature of his family's demands was laid bare against his raw nerves. He spent his mornings waking up at 6 o'clock, his body aching from the stiff hotel mattress. He ran through the crowded, brightly lit aisles of the local Kroger grocery store, sweat dripping down his neck under the harsh fluorescent lights, frantically searching for the specific, expensive brand of gluten-free bread Helen demanded, only to realize he had forgotten the particular string cheese the teenagers required. His afternoons and evenings were a continuous nightmare of exhausting logistics. He sat in the noisy, crowded hotel lobby at 9 o'clock at night, his head pounding, forced to mediate furious, petty arguments between his brother Todd and his father George about which restaurant they should go to for dinner. He spent hours driving across town in heavy traffic just to find a gas station convenience store that carried the exact flavor of crackers his sister's toddler needed to stop throwing tantrums. He had to drive 40 minutes back to the suburban house to check the mailbox, then drive to a 24-hour pharmacy, because George had left his critical blood pressure medication on the counter back in Texas. For 15 years, Sarah had absorbed every single one of these frictions in total, uncomplaining silence. She had anticipated the needs, smoothed over the complaints, washed the endless mountains of sour, sandy towels, and coordinated the chaos so perfectly that Mark had never even noticed it was happening. He had assumed it was easy. He had assumed it was nothing. Now, forced to do it all himself while watching his private savings evaporate into hotel fees and restaurant bills, the relentless, unthanked labor began to shatter his composure. He was sleeping less than 5 hours a night, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling from caffeine and exhaustion, his mind completely broken by the sheer weight of serving 12 entitled people who never once asked if he was tired. On the final night of the 2-week ordeal, Mark found himself slumped on a cheap plastic chair in the dim hallway of the Marriott, staring blankly at the ugly patterned carpet. The floor around his feet was littered with empty fast food bags, greasy cardboard pizza boxes, and crumpled soda cans, the detritus of a family that expected someone else to clean up after them. His phone buzzed weakly in his limp, calloused hand. He lifted it to his eyes, expecting another demand from his mother. Instead, it was a text message from his daughter, Lily, away at her college dorm. The text read, "Hey Dad, Grandma Helen called me today to complain about Mom's attitude again. I told her to shut up and back off. Honestly, Dad, I'm so incredibly proud of Mom for finally refusing to disappear into that kitchen this summer. She just had her spine cut open. You guys have treated her like a machine for as long as I can remember. You need to let her heal, and you need to figure it out." Mark stared at the glowing blue text, the words burning into his retinas. He looked down at his wrinkled, sweat-stained shirt, his unwashed slacks, and his empty wallet. The silence of the empty hotel hallway felt incredibly heavy, pressing down on his shoulders like iron. For the first time in his entire adult life, the defensive anger inside him didn't flare up. The arrogance was completely gone. He just sat there in the dark, breathing in the stale air, filled with an immense, crushing weight of understanding. The renovation crew finished 2 days early. The heavy plastic sheeting was gone, revealing a transformed home. The freshly varnished, hardwood floors gleamed like liquid amber under the warm afternoon light. The ceiling in the upstairs hallway was crisp white and entirely free of the old, dark water stain. In the living room, the central air conditioning unit hummed a low, perfectly even tune, no longer rattling inside the walls. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint, clean wax, and lavender. On the 15th evening, all 12 members of the Brooks family gathered in the living room. They sat stiffly on the sofas, their bags packed and piled near the door. The 2 weeks at the Marriott had taken a visible toll. Todd looked exhausted, his shirt wrinkled. Mark had deep, dark circles under his bloodshot eyes. Only Helen sat perfectly straight, her chin tilted upward, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her posture was defensive, ready to receive a long-awaited apology. They all assumed Sarah had come back to explain herself, perhaps to cry, and to let them magnanimously forgive her, so she could return to her old role. Sarah entered the room, moving with a slow, unhurried grace. She was no longer wearing the bulky canvas medical brace. Her spine was straight, her posture tall and loose. She did not sit down. Instead, she moved quietly around the space, carrying a stack of neat, identical manila folders. She handed one to each adult, placing them directly into their laps without saying a word. She walked over to the fireplace and stood by the hearth, the exact spot where she had stood outside the frame of 100 family holiday photographs. "Open them," Sarah said. Her voice was quiet, steady, and sharp as a clinical blade. The only sound in the room was the crisp rustle of paper turning in unison. The cover page of each folder bore a simple title in bold, black print: 15 Years of Hospitality, Financial Report, and Delegated Labor Audit. Directly beneath it, circled in red ink, was the final calculated figure: $64,800. The color drained from Helen's face instantly. Her eyes scanned the first page, which itemized every single dollar spent on specialty gluten-free groceries, premium meats, and endless boxes of name-brand snacks over a decade and a half. The next page detailed the utility bills, showing the massive, sharp spikes in electricity and water every single July, highlighted in red ink. Todd flipped his page quickly, his jaw tightening as his eyes landed on a scanned receipt from 2021, the exact cost of the rental car Sarah had quietly paid for when his own transmission failed. Beside the receipt was a photograph Sarah had taken that same summer. It showed Helen and Todd sitting on the porch drinking iced tea, while Sarah's blurred reflection in the window showed her scrubbing the kitchen counters alone. "Can anyone here name a single vacation?" Sarah asked, her voice cutting through the heavy silence, "where I was treated as a guest instead of unpaid staff?" Nobody answered. Mark stared down at the folder in his lap, his fingers clenching the cardboard edge. "Can anyone remember," Sarah continued, her eyes locking onto Helen, "ever asking if I was healthy enough, rested enough, or even willing before you opened my doors for 2 weeks every single summer?" The room remained entirely paralyzed. George cleared his throat, but no words came out. Todd quietly closed his folder and slid it onto the coffee table, his ears burning red. Helen looked down at the photograph of herself, her sharp arguments suddenly melting away into a stunned, defensive silence. For the first time in 15 years, she was looking at a literal accounting of her own entitlement. "I am not asking for this money back," Sarah said, her voice dropping lower but remaining perfectly firm. "Mark, you can keep the $64,000. Use it to buy the new vehicle you wanted. I printed this data because for 15 years, this family made me believe my labor was free. You made me feel invisible in my own house. The machine is broken now. It will never run for free again." Mark looked up, his face twisted not with anger, but with a sudden, crushing shock of recognition. He looked at the numbers, then at his wife's straight, healed spine. Sarah did not wait for an apology or a counterargument. She gathered her small handbag, turned toward the front door, and walked out into the cool evening air, leaving the heavy silence of the room behind her. She drove back to the rehab apartment for one final night of total peace, knowing the weight of her entire marriage was finally sitting in someone else's hands. The golden October afternoon sun flooded the kitchen window. Outside, the autumn leaves of suburban Atlanta turned brilliant shades of amber and rust. The scent of warm cinnamon tea and toasted pecans filled the air. Sarah stood by the polished granite counter, her movements entirely fluid and free. Her spine had healed completely. The medical brace was packed away in the deep dark of the closet. Months had passed, and the quiet rhythm of a new life had settled into the house. The old open-door policy was gone forever. Mark's entire mindset had shifted. He no longer managed his family's comfort at the expense of his wife's health. Just weeks prior, when Todd called asking to drop by unexpectedly, Mark's voice had been firm and clear. Sarah overheard him from the hallway. "No, Todd, we are keeping things small now. You must plan visits with us in advance, just like anyone else." Mark had even looked at his father later that evening and said, "This is Sarah's home. I should have remembered that years ago." The phone on the counter vibrated with a soft, steady hum. Sarah picked it up. The caller ID showed Helen's name. Sarah pressed the screen. "Hello, Helen." The voice on the other end was different. The sharp, commanding tone of the last 15 years was completely gone. It sounded smaller, hesitant, and quiet. "Sarah," Helen said, clearing her throat softly. I was wondering, would next Saturday afternoon be a good time for a short visit? I will call ahead, of course. And I would love to bring lunch for us, if that is all right with you. Sarah looked out at the peaceful backyard, where the golden light danced across the green grass. There was no anger left in her chest. She understood now that Helen was simply a product of an old, broken system, and today she was finally learning to respect a real boundary. Saturday would be lovely, Helen, Sarah replied, a genuine warmth in her voice. I will see you then. She hung up the phone and set it down. She picked up her warm mug, feeling the solid heat against her palms. She walked out onto the back porch, stepping into the brilliant, glowing twilight of the golden hour. The air was crisp, cool, and clean. She took a deep breath, her spine strong, her mind completely at peace. She was no longer a victim, no longer invisible, and no longer waiting to be rescued. She stood alone in the beautiful, quiet, free, proud, and entirely responsible for her own bright future. All shadows must fade before the truth, and every pain is simply the start of a beautiful rebirth. Always remember, the right to write a new chapter of your life is forever in your hands. Please like, share, and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Hope to see you on the next page.